Forget the UFC, forget the Olympics. Thousands of years ago, ancient Egyptians were perfecting moves so insane they looked like they were ripped straight out of a modern MMA fight. We're breaking into the tombs and decoding the hieroglyphs to find out if this was the true origin of all combat sports. We all think we know where combat sports began, right? The answer has to be the legendary Olympic Games in ancient Greece. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the real blueprint for fighting as a sport was drawn up 1,000 years earlier on the banks of the Nile? For centuries, the secrets of the pharaohs were locked away in stone tombs. But when archaeologists finally broke them open, they found something nobody expected. Painted all over the walls weren't just gods and kings, but athletes. Men stripped down for a fight, locked in unbelievably complex grappling. This was Egyptian wrestling, a sport that seems to be as old as the pyramids themselves. Today, we are peeling back 4,000 years of history to investigate the evidence. We're going to analyze their techniques, figure out what it meant to them, and expose how the pharaohs used this sport for power. So, was Egyptian wrestling the first true combat sport? Let's find out. Our journey starts at a 4,000-year-old burial site called Beni Hasan, and inside the tomb of a governor named Bakhet III, we find our first mind-blowing piece of evidence. Carved into the walls is an ancient instruction manual, a stop-motion film of fighting, frozen in time. There are literally hundreds of painted scenes showing pairs of wrestlers in action. We're talking single and double-leg takedowns, hip throws, and moves that look just like modern submission holds. You can see wrestlers fighting for leverage, throwing their opponents off balance, and hitting moves that look like early versions of a suplex. The detail is just insane. It doesn't just show the moves, it shows the counters and reversals. This is a complete, strategic system of grappling. And these weren't just street fights. The athletes wore simple loincloths for total freedom of movement. It was all about pure skill, using leverage to beat raw strength. Now, while we see the absolute motherlode of evidence here, we know from other tombs, like the tomb of Ptahhotep at Saqqara, that wrestling was already around for centuries before this. But Beni Hasan is different. It's the earliest known how-to guide for an organized fighting system in human history. This training was crucial for their army, building strong soldiers for hand-to-hand combat. But it was also a sport for everyone. This isn't just art, it's a perfect record of the world's first martial arts textbook. But wrestling in Egypt was so much more than just a fight. To get it, you have to understand their idea of Ma'at, the cosmic principle of truth, harmony, and order. Wrestling, a controlled battle between two equal opponents, was the living symbol of that idea. It was the struggle between order and chaos, played out for everyone to see. That's why you see wrestling everywhere in their culture. It wasn't just hidden in tombs. Huge wrestling matches were held at royal festivals to entertain the pharaoh and show off how strong his kingdom was. Archaeologists have even found tiny wooden models of wrestlers inside tombs. Just like they'd bury model breweries to have beer in the afterlife, they buried these statues to grant the dead eternal strength. They literally wanted to keep wrestling in the next life. And the wrestlers themselves were celebrities. We found hieroglyphs where they're literally trash-talking each other in front of the pharaoh. One inscription reads, "Watch this. I'm going to make you fall helpless, right in front of the pharaoh." This proves it was a public spectacle with star athletes, way before the gladiators of Rome ever stepped into an arena. This is where it gets crazy. The pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was seen as the guy who personally guaranteed order and defeated Egypt's enemies. So, wrestling became the ultimate political tool to prove his power. The proof is carved into the walls of the massive temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu. We see incredible scenes of Egyptian wrestlers competing. But look closer. Their opponents aren't Egyptians. They're shown as Nubians, Libyans, and Syrians, the traditional enemies of Egypt. And in every single one of these official carvings, the Egyptian wrestler is shown winning. This was pure propaganda. These carvings were placed right below the pharaoh's window of royal appearance, where he would stand to accept tribute from foreign lands he'd conquered. The message couldn't be clearer. Just like our athletes dominate their rivals, our pharaoh dominates all enemies on the battlefield. One scene even shows the defeated wrestler being forced to kiss the ground, a total symbol of submission. And get this, the matches were regulated. The carvings at Medinet Habu clearly show officials holding rods, like referees, to enforce the rules. They would hold these international wrestling matches for visiting diplomats, basically using sports to show off Egyptian superiority without starting a war. This is sports diplomacy, centuries before the famous Olympic truce in Greece. Okay, the case for Egypt is huge, but to be fair, they weren't the only ones who turned fighting into a sport. We have to check out the other contenders for the title of first. The most obvious rival is ancient Greece. The Greeks were obsessed with sports, and their combat arts were legendary. Greek wrestling, or pale, was a huge deal at the Olympics, starting in 708 BC, but they also had something way more brutal: Pankration. Kicking off in 648 BC, Pankration was basically an ancient form of MMA, mixing boxing, wrestling, and kicking. With only two rules, no biting and no eye gouging, the fights were savage and could even end in death. But we can go back even further. In Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, archaeologists have found art from as early as 3000 BCE that shows boxers. These ancient images show bare-knuckle fighters squared up, proving that striking arts have been around for a very, very long time. So, the Egyptians weren't totally alone. Turning fighting into a sport seems to be something humans just do. The real question is, who has the best claim to being first with a fully developed sport? All right, let's put these ancient giants head-to-head. Round 1. The timeline. The earliest hints of boxing in Mesopotamia date to around 3000 BCE, but they're just single images. The detailed instructional wrestling murals in Egypt are from around 2000 BCE. Meanwhile, Greek wrestling and pankration didn't hit the Olympics until around 700 BC. That gives Egypt a 1,300-year head start on the Greeks when it comes to a well-documented, systematic combat sport. Round 2. The sport itself. Greek pankration was famous for being a brutal, no-holds-barred fight to submission or even death. It was all about extreme violence. But Egyptian wrestling seems to have been a technical, non-lethal sport. All the evidence points to a focus on skill, leverage, and control, more like modern judo than a death match. The goal was to prove you were the better athlete, not to kill your opponent. Round 3. The record. This is Egypt's knockout punch. Other cultures left us statues or poems that mention fighting. But nobody comes close to the instructional manual at Beni Hasan. The Egyptians didn't just show us that they wrestled. They showed us how they wrestled, in step-by-step detail. We see a complete system from stances and grips to throws and counters. That level of documentation is absolutely unmatched in the ancient world for its time. It shows a true science of combat. So, after all that, can we say Egyptian wrestling was the first combat sport? The answer is a little complicated. The simple urge to fight is as old as people, and basic wrestling probably existed forever. And we know boxing was shown in art earlier in Mesopotamia. However, when we say sport, we mean more than just a brawl. We mean a structured system with rules, techniques, and a real role in society. And based on that definition, Ancient Egyptian wrestling has the strongest claim to being the world's first documented combat sport. The evidence is overwhelming. By 2000 BCE, Egypt had an incredibly advanced and organized system of wrestling, shown with a level of detail that nobody would match for thousands of years. It was a core part of their society. It was military training, public entertainment, religious symbolism, and a political weapon. They had regulated matches with referees centuries before the Greeks. So while Greek Pankration might be the ancestor of MMA, Egyptian wrestling is the original, documented blueprint for all combat sports. It's the earliest complete picture of a civilization turning raw violence into a true art form. From the tomb walls of Beni Hasan to the propaganda at Medinet Habu, the story of Egyptian wrestling is absolutely incredible. It was athletic, it was symbolic, and it was political. It was a 4,000-year-old grappling art that looks like it could be in the UFC today. So while the Greeks get all the credit for the Olympics, the evidence is clear. The Egyptians were mastering combat sports for over 1,000 years before them. They didn't just fight, they created a sport that was part of their soul. What other secrets from the ancient world could change everything we think we know? If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we have so many more ancient mysteries to uncover. Like this video if you learned something new, and share it with a friend who loves history or martial arts. And let us know in the comments, what ancient mystery should we investigate next? Thanks for watching.